Just down the road here as well, Tooting Broadway, those of us who know Wandsworth, there's a huge bingo hall. Just behind, there's a huge Sainsbury's shopping centre behind the... You go there on a Tuesday night, 600-700 people there. Huge places of association. So there are places where people gather, where people meet, where people relate, where people organize, where people actually get their cues and their signals from in relation to this is our culture, this is our faith, this is how we act, this is how we should behave, these are the it normalizes our behavior. That's 95% of the community, but most of the decisions are actually made, sorry, let me just get this thing out, in these places. And I reckon in terms of the social fabric of our local society, it's probably only about 5% of the people in our communities are in these organizations, hospitals, places like this, GP places. So what we've got is, we've got 95% of the people on the outside who are associating, living, organizing, living their lives, and 5% of the people on the inside making decisions about the 95% of people on the outside. Now that's an important consideration for us to think about, because what we've got is, we've got the social which exists outside the clinical. And that's part of the problem. And those of us who work in institutions will know that, we end up talking to people who talk like us. I'm a Muslim, I go to the mosque. And when I go to some of our mosques, I just end up having a Muslim conversation with other Muslims about Islamic issues. And when we go to the black church, for example, we talk about church, we talk about Bible. When you go to the bingo hall, you talk about numbers and who's going to win that evening. When you're inside the institutions, you just talk about clinical practice most of the time. I was speaking to Darren yesterday about 4 or 5 conversations I had throughout the day. And yesterday was a very good example of this, that during the day we had conversations about systems, about the Labour Party, the conference was going on. I went back to my office in Battersea, we talked football, and I came here in the evening about 5 o'clock and I spoke to somebody inside this institution, and all of a sudden it was a completely different conversation. It was like a very narrow, limited conversation about meetings and outputs and things that which looks nothing like the 95% on the outside. And this is an important thing for us to think about. How do we connect this with that? Which brings us to where we are today. So what we try to do is try to find the connections between the social and the institutions. Where are the gaps in between? And what we actually want to do is create an integrated community architecture. We hear about it all the time. Yesterday, those of us who heard his name slips me. Who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Health? Andy Burnham. And if Labour comes in, what they're going to do, they're going to integrate health and social care. And I was at the Labour Party conference myself 2 days ago, and in fact, what are they integrating? They're actually not integrating with the community. They're just integrating, let the hospital talk a little bit better to the social services, let social services talk a little bit better. They're actually just integrating themselves. There's no integration with the 95% that exists outside. So it's just kind of a bureaucratic integration. And that actually isn't going to, because 95% of the people who have got issues, problems, regular day-to-day things which are affecting their lives actually exist here. They don't exist here. And actually this is the integration agenda. And that's part of the problem, is that the people who are making decisions are all stuck in here. We could actually transfer that and move it upstairs to government. Government are actually just in their own bubble, talking to themselves and actually not talking to the people outside. We know that. We know that. And not that I want to get political, but 45% of people, in spite of all the threats, and doom and gloom, you're going to lose the pound, you're going to lose the Queen, you're going to lose the BBC, still 1.6 million people says we don't believe you. And the same thing actually happens, in our communities. You speak to people outside in our communities, they'll just say we don't believe you. We don't believe that mental health is going to improve. We don't believe that things are going to change. So the trick is to find who lives in communities, who are the people inside communities, inside who we can then form relationships with. So what we did in our work, and you'll hear about the work with our black church friends, and these networks exist right across the community. So if you go to Sheffield and elsewhere, you'll see they'll exist on the outside. The challenge isn't to go into these communities and do things to these communities. The challenge is to find what these communities are doing themselves. For the community organizations to say we can partner you as equals. Even bigger challenge for the big institutions to say, we will partner you as equals. And what we've managed to do in our work, and last night I got up in a complete cold sweat. You'll see the thing that we're circulating with the blue map on it. And I said to, me and Darren were doing the slides yesterday, and early this morning about 4 o'clock, I said, I've missed the slide. Now, if you just look at that blue map, that's just Wandsworth. You could actually imagine your own communities looking exactly the same. Areas of deprivation, community organizations where they are, and any area you can look at across the country can be mapped out like that. Where are the areas? Where are the areas of deprivation? Where are the community groups? Now, once you start mapping out who is who and what's what in a local community, it's then relatively straightforward to do what we did in the yellow squares, in the yellow circles, is to identify what are communities interested in and what are institutions interested in, and then find that gap in the middle that can connect the two. And a lot of our work, you'll see our link on the website, we're doing similar work with dementia services, with obesity, older people services, with health, public health services. It's finding those gaps in the middle that can connect the two. And this comes back to what Annie said about relationships, about intelligence, about knowing who's in your communities, about relationships. We were lucky in Wandsworth, we have a community empowerment network. Who is going to build those kind of relationships? The trust, the institutions lack the ability to build those relationships. And communities lack the abilities to build those relationships. If I went to one of my local mosques in Birmingham, where I come from, and I said to them, speak to your local mental health trust, they wouldn't even know where to begin. If I speak to the mental health trust and say, speak to your local Muslim communities in Spark Hill, they wouldn't know where to begin. So we need to find these brokers in the middle who are able to connect the two together. Once we connect the two together, we then start getting into a very, very interesting dynamic space.